Welcome to the Veridion Briefing. I am Sloan Mercer with the Veridion Group, a private intelligence and security consultancy. This is a special edition, and today we are covering one of the most consequential security events in the Western Hemisphere this year. In late February 2026, Mexican military forces killed Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, in an operation near Tapalpa, Jalisco. What followed was rapid, multi-state retaliatory violence, including roadblocks, vehicle arson, and significant casualties across Mexico. A viral disinformation campaign exploded across social media, and a strategic question emerged that matters far more than any single headline. Does killing the leader of one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations make things better, or does it make things worse? That question has a name in counter-narcotics strategy. It is called the Kingpin problem, and the honest answer, based on decades of evidence across multiple countries, is that it depends entirely on what happens next. Today, I am going to walk you through the verified reporting, the media narratives forming in Mexico, the disinformation that is contaminating public understanding, and the two most likely scenarios for what the next 30 to 90 days look like. Let me start with what we actually know, because separating verified reporting from noise is the first job of any intelligence assessment. High-reliability reporting from Reuters, the Associated Press, and the Financial Times establishes the following baseline. A Mexican-led military operation resulted in El Mencho's death near Tapalpa, Jalisco. The operation was supported by U.S. intelligence, characterized in reporting as information and confirmation support. Reuters additionally reports that a new U.S. military-led task force contributed intelligence collection support, though the operation itself is described as Mexican-executed, not a U.S. raid. The intelligence trail that led to El Mencho's location is the part of this story that generated the most public attention and the most disinformation. Here is what credible reporting actually supports. Authorities exploited a relationship-linked operational security failure. Surveillance of a romantic partner's movements and associated security patterns provided actionable geolocation data. In plain language, someone close to El Mencho, a romantic partner, had a pattern of movement that intelligence services were able to track, and that tracking led to his location. That is the verified kernel. A relationship-linked surveillance and tip chain, combined with U.S. intelligence support described in general terms. Remember that kernel, because we are going to come back to it when we talk about what the disinformation did with it. Following El Mencho's death, multi-state retaliatory violence erupted rapidly. Roadblocks were established across multiple Mexican states, vehicles were set on fire, casualties were reported. The Jalisco State Security Service documented specific figures on vehicle burns and disruption. This retaliatory pattern is consistent with historical cartel responses to leadership decapitation events. The violence was immediate, geographically distributed, and designed to send a message: we can still project force even without our leader. Now, here is where this briefing diverges from standard news coverage, because the events themselves are only part of the story. How those events are being interpreted, framed, and in some cases deliberately distorted in Mexican media and social media is equally important for anyone trying to understand the security environment. We mapped Mexican Spanish-language media coverage into 5 distinct narrative clusters. These are not random. They represent structured frames through which the same underlying events are being processed for different audiences and different purposes. Understanding the frames matters because they shape public perception, government response, and ultimately the security decisions that organizations and individuals make. Cluster A is what we call Estado en control, or state in control. This is the reassurance frame. It positions the Mexican government as having delivered a major blow against organized crime, characterizes the violence as bounded and manageable, and signals a return to normalcy. The most visible expression of this frame is the reporting around President Sheinbaum's communication with FIFA President Infantino regarding the 2026 World Cup, with FIFA confirming a site visit to review security and mobility arrangements. The function of this frame is to calm the public and markets while reducing reputational damage to the administration. It is the frame the government wants to dominate. Cluster B is magnitude del caos, or scale of chaos. This is the disruption accounting frame. It counts affected states, roadblocks, burned vehicles, casualties, and municipal impacts. Latinus and La Jornada reporting amplifies this frame with specific figures from state security agencies. Its function is to document severity and increase accountability pressure. It directly competes with Cluster A by undermining the reassurance narrative with evidence of how widespread the disruption actually was. Cluster C is Como lo ubicaron, or how they found him. This is the operational storyline frame. It centers on the relationship-linked surveillance chain and the role of U.S. intelligence support. AP and Reuters reporting anchors this cluster. Its function is to validate state capability and explain why the operation succeeded now rather than at any point in the preceding years. Cluster D is riesgo estratégico, or strategic risk. This is the fragmentation warning frame. It warns that killing the leader may trigger worse outcomes than leaving him in place, citing the historical pattern known as the Kingpin strategy problem, where decapitation of a cartel leads to fragmentation, succession violence, and prolonged instability. The Financial Times analysis, highlighting this risk and successor uncertainty, anchors this cluster. Its function is to counter premature victory narratives and foreground the second-order effects that most headlines ignore. Cluster E is infoxication or information intoxication. This is the disinformation correction frame. It addresses rumors, manipulated visuals, and unverified identity claims circulating on social media, with calls for verification and denial stories. Its function is to limit fear amplification and clean up narrative contamination. That fifth cluster brings us to the disinformation that became the dominant social media story surrounding El Mencho's death, and it requires careful analytical treatment. A viral claim spread rapidly across platforms asserting that an OnlyFans model working for the CIA had provided the information that led to El Mencho's location. This claim was accompanied by alleged images of the woman in question, which were subsequently identified as likely AI-generated. Our assessment is that this claim is unsubstantiated and best characterized as likely manipulative viral bait. We rate its narrative integrity at 2 out of 10 with high confidence. Here is the analytical basis for that assessment. The claim displays 3 classic manipulation signatures. First, authority laundering. Credible reporting describes U.S. intelligence support in general terms. The viral claim inflates this to CIA asset or handler, an unsupported leap that exploits the real kernel of U.S. involvement to add conspiratorial weight. There is no credible reporting that the CIA ran a human source in this operation, let alone that the source was a social media personality. Second, identity injection. The addition of OnlyFans model dramatically increases virality and audience engagement, but is not supported by any primary reporting. This is a classic amplification technique. You take a real but boring detail, a relationship-linked intelligence trail, and inject an identity that is maximally shareable, maximally provocative, and maximally engaging for social media algorithms. Third, synthetic imagery. The rumor spread was explicitly tied to alleged images that multiple outlets subsequently reported as likely AI-generated. This is consistent with a fabricated visual evidence amplification pattern where synthetic or manipulated imagery is used to give a false claim the appearance of documentary proof. What credible reporting actually supports is narrower and less sensational. A relationship-linked surveillance and tip chain contributed to locating El Mencho. U.S. intelligence support is described in general terms. That is it. The viral version grafts identity bait and conspiratorial agency attribution onto this real but more limited kernel. For anyone consuming information about this event, the lesson is straightforward. When a story is simultaneously too perfect for social media virality and too thin on sourcing, that combination is a signal, not a coincidence. The most shareable version of a story is almost never the most accurate version. Now let me turn to the question that matters most for security professionals. What happens next? We modeled 2 primary scenarios using structured analytic techniques. Scenario 1 is sustained. centrally directed retaliation against the Mexican government. This means repeated, coordinated multi-state disruption waves designed to punish the government and deter further operations against CJNG leadership. We assess this at approximately 30 to 40% likelihood over 30 days, declining to approximately 20 to 30% over 90 days. The logic behind the declining probability is this. The immediate shock retaliation already delivered the core deterrence message. Sustaining that level of coordinated violence over weeks and months increases security pressure and law enforcement attention at precisely the moment when CJNG's remaining leadership needs to consolidate power rather than expose itself. Sustained retaliation is strategically counterproductive during a succession crisis because it draws exactly the kind of government and international attention that makes succession harder. The indicators that would strengthen this scenario include a second and third wave of synchronized multi-state disruptions beyond the immediate aftershock period, and the emergence of consistent narrative discipline in CJNG-linked communications, explicitly framing actions as punishment for the Tapalpa operation. Scenario 2 is fragmentation-driven volatility. This means degraded organizational cohesion producing patchy, opportunistic violence that may rise in aggregate but is less centrally controlled and less strategically coherent. We assess this at approximately 45 to 55% likelihood over 30 days, rising to approximately 50 to 60% over 90 days. This is the Kingpin strategy problem in action. When you remove the leader of a large, geographically distributed criminal organization, you do not get a smooth succession. You get regional lieutenants competing for control. You get splinter cells pursuing their own agendas. You get revenue disputes, territory conflicts, and internal trust collapse. The violence does not necessarily decrease. It becomes less predictable, less centrally coordinated, and harder to anticipate because there is no longer a single decision-maker whose behavior you can model. The Financial Times analysis explicitly highlights this risk, and Reuters and AP, reporting both note successor uncertainty and CJNG's broad geographic footprint, conditions that are consistent with elevated fragmentation probability. The indicators that would strengthen this scenario include violence becoming geographically uneven and signature inconsistent across states, competing successor narratives or contender claims emerging in reporting and social media, and localized coercion patterns without centralized direction signatures. For the Mexican presidency specifically, the next 30 to 90 days represent an elevated volatility window. The highest uncertainty driver is whether CJNG behavior consolidates into disciplined retaliation or devolves into fragmentation. The 2026 World Cup creates a major reputational and operational surface. The FIFA Security and Mobility Review that President Sheinbaum announced is not just a diplomatic gesture, it is a practical necessity. Large-scale crowd movement events in an environment of cartel volatility create a security planning challenge that requires candid risk assessment rather than reassurance framing. The information environment will remain heightened. Rumor clusters like the OnlyFans Disinformation campaign can amplify public fear, shape behavior, and distort resource deployment demands, and the media environment itself is under stress. Reporters Without Borders via Swissinfo and EFE reported journalist attacks during the post-operation unrest, consistent with intimidation dynamics that degrade the quality and reliability of public information precisely when accurate reporting matters most. For corporate security professionals and risk managers with operations in Mexico, the implications are specific. If you have personnel, supply chain exposure, or physical assets in Mexican states affected by CJNG operations, your threat posture should be calibrated to the fragmentation scenario as the most likely baseline. That means expecting patchy, unpredictable violence rather than a coordinated campaign with identifiable patterns. It means monitoring for localized disruption events, roadblocks, extortion escalation, and territorial disputes that may not make national headlines but directly affect ground-level operations. And it means recognizing that the information environment surrounding any future incident will be contaminated by disinformation, requiring verification discipline before making operational decisions based on social media reporting. The broader lesson here extends beyond Mexico. The Kingpin strategy, targeting the leadership of criminal or terrorist organizations, is one of the most debated approaches in security policy. It produces an immediate visible result. The leader is removed. But the second-order effects, fragmentation, succession violence, territorial redistribution, and the potential emergence of multiple smaller but less predictable organizations are harder to see and harder to manage. Every security professional operating in an environment affected by organized crime leadership disruption should be planning for the fragmentation scenario as the baseline, not treating the leadership removal as the end of the problem. That is the Veridion Briefing Special Edition on Mexico's post-El Mencho environment. The full analytical product with complete source citations, the narrative cluster map, disinformation module, scenario modeling with indicators and warnings, and protective intelligence implications is available through the Veridion Group. If your organization operates in Mexico or has supply chain, personnel, or asset exposure affected by Mexican security conditions, visit veridiongroup.com/briefing to schedule a consultation with our analysts. I am Sloan Mercer with the Veridion Group. Stay informed, stay prepared. I will see you next week.